Neil Young announces he's back on Spotify after singers' protest against Rogan. It's just utter ridiculousness. No one cares. No one cares that this guy is back on Spotify. No one cared when he left Spotify. He just he can't stand different thoughts. He hate people that have different ideals than him. So he protests Spotify. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that. But before we get started, go ahead and hit that like button, share this out so we get this information out there. Subscribe if you're not already a subscriber, and hit that alarm bell so you know when I'm putting out new stuff. Also, check out my link tree in the description. It has a link to my Patreon. That's where I talk about things I can't talk about here. There's also a link to my Instagram in my merch store. Also, check out jjthepsychotherapist.com for news as well. All right, let's talk about this news. Now, this comes from the Daily Wire. Katie Jerkovich, and she reports that Neil Young announced his music is back on Spotify after the singer had issued an ultimatum to the music streaming platform in 2022 to pull Joe Rogan from its site or lose him. Like, come on. Who do you think brings Spotify more money, Joe Rogan or Neil Young? Come on now. It was a joke when he said this, so no one cared. I said he left. He was getting blasted on Twitter. No one cared that he left. But in a statement on his website on Wednesday, the 78-year-old rocker didn't directly address his previous threat that, quote, they can have Rogan or Young, not both, which came after the Joe Rogan Experience podcast host alleged misinformation about the COVID vaccine on his show. The Hollywood Reporter reported. Instead, the veteran rocker labeled Spotify low res, stating it's the site where you get less quality than we made, and wrote that he was returning because other major streaming services will now distribute Rogan's podcast, and he can't pull his music from all those platforms. My decision comes as music services Apple and Amazon have started serving the same disinformation podcast features I opposed at Spotify, Young wrote without naming the podcast. So, because he despises it, that makes it wrong. And so, just get off all platforms. I mean, if you just hate it that much, if you hate difference of opinion so much, then just leave. You know what I'm saying? Just leave. Like I said, no one cared that this man even left Spotify. No one cared that he's back. Here's the tweet right here that ABC News tweeted out the story. He said, quote, I cannot just leave Apple and Amazon like I did with Spotify because my music would have very little streaming outlet to music lovers at all. He added, so I have returned to Spotify in sincere hopes that Spotify's sound quality will improve and people will be able to hear and feel all the music as we made it. Hopefully, Spotify will turn to high res as the answer and serve all the music to everyone. The rocker continues. Spotify, you can do it. Really, be number one in all ways. You have the music and the listeners. Start with the limited high res tier and build from there. In January 2022, Young issued an ultimatum to Spotify that he will pull his entire music catalog until they cut ties with Rogan, as previously reported. He said, quote, please act on this immediately today and keep me informed on the time schedule, Young shared in the since deleted message to his management team and label. I want you to let Spotify know immediately today that I want all my music off their platform. Remember when he said all this? They can have Joe Rogan or they can have Young, not both. Just ridiculous. Just ridiculous. With an estimated 11 million listeners per episode, JRE, which is hosted exclusively on Spotify, but not anymore. Now he's starting to put a little bit more of his stuff on YouTube and other platforms now. Is the world's largest podcast and has tremendous influence. The letter continues. Spotify has a responsibility to mitigate the spread of misinformation on its platform, though the company presently has no misinformation policy. At the time, Spotify issued a statement that, quote, we have detailed content policies in place and we've removed over 20,000 podcast episodes related to COVID since the start of the pandemic. Um, and they talk about they regret Neil's decision, whatever, whatever. But all that being said, he's back on Spotify. Nobody cares. I totally forgot that this man was even gone from Spotify, but I really don't use Spotify much for music anyway. I use it for some podcasts. Basically, the JRE podcast was the only reason I really was using Spotify because I use um, um, not endorsing them or anything like that, but I use YouTube for my music and podcast, most podcasts and stuff like that. Um, but let me know what you think about this. Leave your comments down below. Like, share, and subscribe. And check out jjthepsychotherapist.com for the latest in news. Until next time, peace.